with the exception of verse 22 of this 7th chapter. Notice this now. In verse 21, he saw the little horn making war on the saints until, up to a certain point, until three things happened. Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Here we have a plain fact that the Ancient of Days, the person sitting on the throne in verse 9, is going to come to the earth. No doubt you have all heard of the first and second comings of God the Father to the earth. That seems to be more or less a common doctrine these days in most all churches. Now, I don't mean most all, but in quite a number of them now. I remember the time when very few churches would preach on the second coming of Jesus Christ. They didn't know very much about it. And so we didn't hear much about it in many of our modern churches. But in recent years, most all of our larger denominations are beginning to accept the doctrine of the second coming of Christ to the earth. And it's becoming more or less a common doctrine throughout Christendom. But there is a doctrine in this passage, Daniel 7:22, that the Christian church has seldom, if ever, heard of before. And yet, it's in plain English just as much as verse 13 is in plain English. Verse 13 tells us that the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. Verse 22 tells us that the Ancient of Days came. Now, where did the Ancient of Days come to, and where did he come from? Naturally, if he lives in the heavens, as Jesus Christ and all the prophets told us that he does, when Christ told us to say, Our Father which art in heaven, he didn't say, Our Father which art everywhere, all at the same time. He said, Our Father which art in heaven. Numbers of times he taught us that. God lives on a planet called heaven. He can sit on a real seat just like you can. He has a real personal body just like you have. He has bodily parts just like you have. His legs bend the same place where your legs bend. His hips bend the same place where your hips bend. He can sit on a seat just as much as you can. And he can go from place to place and does do so, just like any other person. Now here we have in verse 22, the Ancient of Days came. Where did he come from if he lives in heaven? Naturally, he would be coming from heaven. This teaches us that at the second coming of Jesus Christ, God the Father is going to accompany Christ to the earth. For you'll notice here this little horn is making war on the earth, on the saints, till he was stopped. And who put a stop to him making war on the saints? And what caused him to stop? Why, the Ancient of Days came down here. That's the reason. The Ancient of Days came where he was making war on the saints and put a stop to it. In Zechariah 14, we have a statement beginning with verse 1, that the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half of the city shall go forth into captivity, but the residue, or the rest of the people, shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. His feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. The Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof. And we read that half of the mountain shall flee toward the north, half of it toward the south, and there shall be a very great valley. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains. Yea, ye shall flee, ye fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah. The Lord my God cometh, and all the saints with thee. That refers to the second coming of Christ, just like Daniel 7, 13, and 14, and 22 does, or do. So we have here the fact that the Ancient of Days is going to come to the earth. And in Zechariah 14:5, it's called, the Lord my God cometh, and all the saints with thee. In Titus 2:13, Paul told the Christians about the blessed hope. He said, looking for that blessed hope and the glorious appearing of two persons. And they are called here the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. So we can definitely say there is coming a time when the Father is going to come to this earth visibly, just like the Son came to this earth one time before, and just like we believe that He is coming again. The Bible not only teaches a first coming of God the Father to the earth, but it also teaches a second coming of God the Father to the earth. In the 21st chapter of Revelation, it's just as clear as anything that God the Father is going to come to this earth and live here forever. For John said he saw a new Jerusalem descending from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And in verse 3 we read, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and He, God, shall dwell with them, and they shall be His people, and God Himself shall be with them and be their God." God Himself, not another. God Himself shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, tears, or sorrow. So you see, there is a first and second comings of God, of Christ mentioned in the Bible. There is also a doctrine of the first and second comings of God the Father mentioned in the Bible. When Christ came 1900 years ago, He came in visible form to live on this planet and fulfill a mission. We call that the first coming of Christ. The next coming of Christ will be the second time that He will actually come from heaven with the armies of heaven sufficiently large enough to seize the governments of this world in one day's battle and establish a reign of righteousness on the earth forever. In other words, the second time Christ is coming, it's going to be in literal, visible form, just like He came the first time. In Acts 1:11, we're told, "This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen Him go into heaven." When John saw the revelation on Patmos, the theme of that whole book concerned the second coming of Jesus Christ mainly. The main theme of the book. In verse 7, it states that theme, "Every eye shall see Him. They also which pierced Him, and all the kindreds of the earth shall wail because of Him." His coming is pictured here and there throughout the book of Revelation. And it's vividly described in Revelation 19, verse 11, where John said, "I saw heaven open, and behold a white horse, and He that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness He doth judge and make war." The armies of heaven followed Him on white horses, clothed in linen white and clean. He said, "I saw the beast, the kings of the earth and their armies, gathered together against Him that sat on the horse and against His armies. The beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before Him. These both were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. The remnant were slain by the sword of him that sat on the horse, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh." So I think in all your getting of doctrine, you ought to add this to your many doctrines: the doctrine of the first and second comings of God the Father to the earth. God didn't accompany Christ to the earth the first time He came. He sent Him. The second time Christ comes, God will personally accompany the Son of Man to the earth, and will then give Him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples and nations and languages should serve Him. And then 1,000 years later, God is going to move His capital city from the planet heaven to the planet earth to be among men forever. And we can consider that the second visible coming of God to the earth. Now, some people think of God only as being an invisible spook of some kind, even worse than a whole lot less than the air that we breathe. Yes, they think of God as being some invisible nothingness out in nowhere. They think of Him as some abstract quality, some invisible something out there that we cannot see, we never will see, we never will be able to look upon Him. He doesn't have any form, He doesn't have any body, He doesn't have any bodily parts. He doesn't have any soul. He doesn't have any soul passions, appetites, emotions, feelings, desires, anything of that nature. And that he doesn't have a personal spirit. He doesn't have any intellect, any willpower, any choice power, anything. I wouldn't mind standing before a God like that in a million judgments of the future. If he couldn't see me, if he couldn't hear me, if I never will see him, I wouldn't worry about that at all. But since the Bible teaches a personal God, and that we're going to give an account to a person visibly before us, then we shake in our boots sometimes. we want to sort of live somewhat right, looking forward to that day. Yes, the Bible teaches that God will be seen in all eternity to come. In Revelation 22 verses 4 and 5, we read, they shall look upon his face. Do you know what a face is? Well, that's what it's talking about. They shall look upon his face. His name shall be on their foreheads, and they shall reign forever and ever, referring to the saints. God has been seen in numbers of times in times past, beginning from the Garden of Eden right on through to the days of Abraham when God had a good goat dinner with him in the plains of Mamre. And right on through into the book of Exodus, we read of 74 elders. They saw the God of Israel and did eat and drink. Isaiah saw the Lord high lifted up. Daniel here in Daniel 7 tells us he saw him sitting on a throne. 5 men have seen God as recorded all through the Bible. Whether you want to or not, you're going to see God, because every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord of the glory of God the Father. It's not going to be some invisible kneeling and confession either. It's going to be something visible. So there will come a time when God the Father will come to the earth. There will come another time in which he will move his capital city down to the planet Earth to actually walk among men, and they will see him in visible form, just like we see each other now. For he shall dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. Jesus Christ is also going to be on earth in visible form in those days. People think of him many times, even throughout Christendom, as being some invisible something. But he's got a real body. Same body that was put in the grave came out of the grave. Zechariah 13:6 tells us, one shall say unto me in that day, what are these wounds in your hand? And he will say, these are they that I received in the house of my friend. Ezekiel, in the 40th to the 48th chapters, gave quite a lengthy prophecy of the second coming of Christ and the establishment or building of a millennial temple, and of the sacrifices and the offerings, the new moons of feasts, and all the solemnities of the house of Israel, and told us how there would be a river flowing out from under that sanctuary, trees growing on both sides, and how that a city would be built to the Lord, 12 miles square. And the very last chapter of Ezekiel, the very last verse, tells us the name of the city shall be from that day and forward, the Lord is there. But in the 43rd chapter of Ezekiel, in verse 7, the prophet made this statement concerning the visible, literal feet of Jesus Christ. It reads like this, Son of man, the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever. And my holy name shall the house of Israel no more defile, neither they nor their kings by their whoredom in high places. The idea of Christ reigning on the earth eternally, that seems to be a new thing with people. They just can't comprehend how Christ is going to ever rule on this earth. But he is. Zechariah 14 tells us not only that the Lord God and all the saints are going to come, but in verse 9 it says the Lord shall be king over all the earth. Over all the earth. In that day there shall be one Lord and his name one. Right here in Daniel 7:13 and 14, we read there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, all nations, all languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, not only 1,000 years, as some people teach, but an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Not only will Christ reign here in person, in visible form, in all eternity, but you who expect to be in the resurrection. I hope some of you expect to be. You who expect to go in what we call the rapture of the church, or have any part in the resurrection of the dead. I'm talking about the first resurrection now. The resurrection of the righteous dead. You who expect to be in that resurrection, you will literally live and reign with Christ on this planet Earth forever and ever and ever. So many people think of 1,000 years kingdom only. Then after that, they don't know what's going to happen. But just look at these simple statements. It doesn't speak of 1,000-year period only. It speaks of eternal conditions on earth. One passage in Revelation 20 does mention a period of 1,000 years 6 different times. And 1,000 years, kingdom on earth, of Christ's reign on the earth with his saints, that's taught. But also, the everlasting kingdom of Christ and his saints is taught. So we must recognize one little fact, and that'll bring harmony between the two ideas. The first 1,000 years of Christ's eternal reign is for the purpose of ridding the earth of all rebellion. When that's done, then the Son himself becomes subject unto the Father, who puts all things under the Son. And then, in the new earth, after this, what we call the millennium or the 1,000 years reign of Christ, after that, in the new earth, the Son will be under the Father, subject to him, having accomplished his mission on earth of the first 1,000 years, having rid the earth of all rebellion, he now submits the kingdom to God. And God recognizes the complete work of the Son in ridding the earth of rebellion. And then God becomes all in all. As before rebellion started in the universe in the days of Lucifer and later in the days of Adam. Now, to prove that you also are going to reign with Christ, look at this chapter again. Verse 18 of the 7th chapter of Daniel. What does that say? But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom for 1,000 years. No, it doesn't say for 1,000 years. How long? Forever. And in case you doubted that, it added, even forever and ever. So you see, the saints of the Most High are going to reign forever, even forever and ever. And look at verse 27 of the same chapter. The greatness of the kingdom and under the whole heaven, we read here, shall be given to whom? The people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is how long? An everlasting kingdom. So in verses 13 and 14, when we read of Christ's kingdom being an everlasting kingdom, and you read in verses 18 and 27 of the saints possessing the same everlasting kingdom, we just have to recognize that Christ and all the resurrected saints will reign on this earth at the second coming of Christ on through all eternity. And there's where you come in. If you have any part at all in it, you'll help Christ administer the affairs not only of this little planet, but of all the planets and of all the universes that are in existence. For Romans 8:17 tells us that we become heirs of God and joint heirs with Jesus Christ. That literally means that we will help God administer the affairs of the universe. Did you know that original man had dominion over even the sun, the moon, and the stars? And if man had not fallen, there would have been interplanetary service before now. Man would have gone to these different planets, and they would have ruled all these things for God. Some of you look at me as if that's a fantastic idea. But it isn't. That's not an imagination of mine. That's in the 8th Psalm. It says, what is man that thou art mindful of him, or the son of man that thou visitest him? Thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and did set him over the work of thy fingers. Then it mentions, sun, moon, stars, yea, all sheep, oxen, everything. Over the work of thy fingers, the sun, the moon, the stars. Resurrected man is going to rule forever and dominate all coming generations of natural peoples in all eternity. Now, to prove there will be natural peoples forever, look at verses 13 and 14 again. All peoples, all languages shall do what? Serve him. In Daniel 2, you remember when we studied 2:44 and 45, we read, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. But it says, this kingdom shall not be left to other peoples. That means the same people that enter the kingdom will continue in the kingdom in all eternity. In Matthew 25, verse 31, we read, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. Before him shall be gathered all nations. He shall separate them as a shepherd divideth the sheep from the goats. He'll say to the sheep, come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. And he'll say to the goats on his left hand, depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Then he gives the reason in both cases. The last verse of that chapter says, these shall go into everlasting life, proving that the peoples that will be alive on earth when Christ comes will continue to live on this earth after he comes in all eternity, providing they do not commit a sin during the first 1,000 years, which will cause them to become executed. Now, a person can commit sin during that period. There isn't any question about that. Men will be free moral agents over there just as now. The devil, of course, will be bound. He will be put into the bottomless pit for the first 1,000 years. And men will not have any tempter, but they will still have their own nature. They will still have their own choice power. After all, the devil's not responsible for everything that every man does on the earth. James 1:13 plainly tells us that let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted, and he could have had there, couldn't, and he isn't tempted every time by the devil either. So he explains now, when a man is tempted, he's drawn away of his own lusts and enticed. And when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. When sin is finished, it bringeth forth death. Do not err, my beloved brethren. So, since the devil is bound, during that period, people think that there can be no disobedience. There can be no sin. But in the 20th verse of the 65th chapter of Isaiah, we read of sinners and death and all that, continuing right on. We read, there shall be no more thence an infant of days, not an old man that hath not filled his days. A child shall die. There's death. Child shall die 100 years. But a sinner, S-I-N-N-E-R, sinner, being 100 years old, shall be accursed. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards, eat the fruit of them as the days of a tree, of the days of my people. Mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor or bring forth for trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their children or offspring with them. See, children will be born right along. Their offspring with them. In fact, Isaiah 11 tells us that a child shall play on the hole of an asp, and a weaned child shall put his hand in the cockatrice's den, and they shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, saith the Lord. So the idea of this earth coming to an end and humankind on the earth ceasing to exist, that's one of the greatest errors of modern Christians. There never was anything like that in the Bible, and never will be. Unless somebody changes the Bible. They leave it like it is, though, that the people that go from this period will go right on in the next period, and right on to the next period, and in all the ceaseless ages of eternity. Natural life will be perpetual on this planet Earth. That's what God told Noah when he showed him a rainbow back here. You see this, he said? That's a token of a covenant between me and you and all flesh, or he said, even every living creature that is with you for perpetual generation. So you see in verse 14, all kindreds and all tongues and all peoples and all nations shall serve him how long? until they're all killed off or all die off? No, forever. Who are we going to reign over? Certainly not over ourselves. We do that too much now. We're going to have somebody to reign over. Who are we going to reign over? The peoples that will be here when we come back to the earth to seize the governments of this world. Those will be the subjects of the kingdom. We'll reign over them forever.